Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to notify you that I will be sharing my time with my honourable colleague from Dartmouth Cole Harbour. I'm pleased to join with my colleagues today and rise in this House on this motion, in support of this motion. Mr. Speaker, this government does a very good job of blowing smoke in mirrors. They tote around this notion that Canada's economy isn't suffering and that we're not still experiencing the effects of the economic downturn. Meanwhile, ignoring the reality facing many Canadians and their families. The many families that I'm speaking with in my constituency are still having trouble making ends meet. Not only this, Mr. Speaker, but in order to make ends meet, many Canadians are forced to take on 2, 3, or 4 part-time jobs. And why is this, you might ask? It's because far too many household supporting jobs have been lost. They've disappeared. Canadians are being forced to turn to any form of employment that they can secure. These are usually more precarious forms of employment. I know that many of the constituents of Scarborough Rouge River are burning the candle at both ends, Mr. Speaker. The current Canadian job market remains weaker than it has ever been The current Canadian job market remains weaker than it was before the crisis in October of 2008. Unemployment has risen to 7.3%. The proportion of part-time workers and involuntary part-time workers has also risen rapidly. Full-time, permanent, family-supporting jobs remain very difficult to find in many areas across the country. The real unemployment rate, which of course includes labour force dropouts and involuntary part-time workers, was at 11.1% in July of this year, Mr. Speaker. This is up from 9.4% in July of 2008. How this government can sit on that side of the House and argue that our economy is recovering fine and that Canadians are doing well is absolutely beyond me, Mr. Speaker. What is more is that this bleak job market and lack of real opportunity is even worse for Canada's youth. An article that was recently published in the Globe and Mail earlier this week outlined details from a recent study on Canada's problem with unemployed and underemployed university graduates. This is our best and brightest that I'm speaking about, Mr. Speaker. Yet this week, when I asked the question in this House about this exact topic, the members opposite did not rise up and talk about what they are doing to actually create more jobs and give more opportunity to the most educated in our country, Mr. Speaker. No. Instead, they stood up and spoke about tax credits. Mr. Speaker, what good is a tax credit if you cannot make enough money to pay any income taxes? This, unfortunately, is the bleak situation facing many of our youth today. They do not have jobs that pay enough for them to pay income taxes. What kind of life is that? In my riding of Scarborough Rouge River, the number one issue I hear at the doorstep of my constituents is jobs. Jobs for our youth. Jobs for our elderly. Jobs, jobs, jobs. The riding of Scarborough Rouge River does not have very much to offer in the way of jobs in our constituency. Unfortunately, the reality for many of my constituents is that they must travel into the downtown core of Toronto for work. From our area, that is a minimum of about a 2-hour commute each way. So that's a 4-hour commute in a day that my constituents are spending. I used to do that myself. This means 4 hours a day are spent on public transport, literally in transit. That's 4 hours away from our families, an extra 4 hours a day that our kids must spend in daycare or with other support. 4 hours where we could be working at our second jobs to earn more income that we're not getting at our first job. What is worse, Mr. Speaker, is that many of my constituents do not work the regular 9 to 5. Many work shifts, overnight, or into the wee hours of the morning, and then they must make that 2-hour trek 2-hour trip back home, that trek on public transit, which in the nighttime can even be longer. This becomes an issue of public safety, Mr. Speaker, when members of our family are waiting for buses on our street corners at all hours of the night. This is a huge concern, especially with the continuation of the proposed cuts to these services, especially transit, in the Greater Toronto Area. Many of the parents that I speak with in my community are very worried, Mr. Speaker. They're worried about the welfare and the safety of their children. What messages are we sending to our youth, Mr. Speaker, when the only jobs available to them are part-time or shift work? What messages are we sending to our university graduates when, after spending years and thousands of dollars on earning a degree, they're forced into jobs that are greatly below their education standard? We know that our university grads are getting jobs at the low end of the income scale. What hope for tomorrow do we give these people? This is another question I'm often asked at the doorsteps of my constituency, unfortunately. My riding is one of the poorest in the GTA, Mr. Speaker, yet many of the families that live in my area are spending their life savings or incurring extra and extreme amounts of debt to send their children to school to get that university or college degree or diploma, only to then have their children graduate and not be able to find jobs or find severely underpaying jobs. What financial risks now face these parents? What hope do they have for retirement? What is the quality of life for them in retirement when they spend all of their life savings on their children's education? I'm also asked about the children and people who forego post-secondary education and enter directly into the workforce to help their families, to help put food on their families. These youth are forced into part-time work, shift work, and sometimes, many times, unsafe work. But there is no other option for them. They do this to put food on their families' tables. Many youth in my constituency cannot find work at all, Mr. Speaker. That is very challenging for a community that has the largest youth-to-population ratio in the entire Greater Toronto Area. My constituency has the highest youth-to-population ratio, but the youth in my constituency can't find work. This is a huge problem for me and for the constituents of Scarborough Rouge River. What are we saying to these youth? These youth who are already marginalized because of their age, their ethnicity, their status in the country, and their household income. What are we telling them? Are we telling them that they aren't worth planning for? Many of the families in my riding with children and youth in this situation are very worried. I hear this on a weekly basis when I'm at the doors. This government likes to talk about being tough on crime. Well, why not deal with the real root causes of the crime? Why not provide our youth with a sense of importance and value? Why not provide them with opportunities like jobs, like access to post-secondary education? Why not give them hope, Mr. Speaker, and real opportunities? On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, that is what we believe in. We believe that our youth are the future of our great country. Because of this, we need to provide for our youth. We need to inspire them to be involved. We need to give them the opportunities to be successful, not just set them up to fail, like what I'm seeing from the other side of the House, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker. Our youth and our university graduates, our college graduates, need jobs. They need real jobs that will help them make ends meet, that will help them support their families, that will help them and their children lead better lives. Mr. Speaker, that is what we are fighting for today on this side of the House. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.